if any of you guys have questions, I would love to answer them.
If COVID-19 takes hold in our jails, do you support the furloughing of inmates or some other plan?
So it's a very complicated question. So this is actually one we've been dealing with up in Carroll County since March. So when we first realized how serious COVID-19 was going to be, the county attorney and I talked about what to do with the people who are in our jail up there. And some of them are there serving out sentences, some are there pre-trial. And it's important to treat everybody humanely. So essentially what we did was we broke down everybody who was in on pre-trial or sentences. We figured out if people were there for violent offenses or nonviolent offenses. And if they were there for nonviolent offenses and we believed we could safely supervise them in the community, we transitioned them that way. If there were somebody we felt like they weren't safe in the community, we made sure that we kept them in the House of Corrections because we thought that was the most appropriate place for them. I think if you find that there are widespread outbreaks in the jails coming up, as it looks like COVID-19 is resurfacing, I think we'll have to think about how we manage that. But there are individuals who are not safe to be released. Despite the best efforts of rehabilitation and stuff like that, there are people who are being held for murder, for very serious sexual crimes, and the appropriate place for them is incarceration. So I would basically continue to look at it on a case-by-case basis like we've been doing up in Carroll County, doing everything within our power. Now, Rockingham has a lot more tools, and I think that's another thing to point out. I am a younger person who has never been in charge of a budget quite the size of the Rockingham County Attorney's Office, and some people may question whether or not that's something that I'm ready for. And what I'd say is I've had to prosecute very serious cases in Carroll County with essentially no resources. It's a very small county attorney's office. We do not have the money to fly in important experts for cases. We don't even usually have the money to send out things in the mail. We've tried to do everything possible to cut things like that out of our budget. So I am very used to prosecuting cases on a shoestring budget. And so having the resource of the Rockingham County Attorney's Office, like pretrial supervision, which is something we don't have, having the ability to take somebody who maybe we're afraid is going to run, but not necessarily somebody you're afraid is going to hurt somebody else, and put them on an ankle monitor pre-trial. That's something that alleviates concern about flight, but also lets somebody out and away from a place that may be dangerous. So I would use some of those resources that we're not necessarily used to having up in Carroll County expeditiously, use them frugally, but use them to make sure that we can keep people who are incarcerated safe, just like we want to keep people who are not incarcerated in the community safe.
Thank you. So, Steve, that one of my biggest concerns over the last 25 years is that people don't stay in prosecution. It used to be a career, and now it's not anymore. And that is festered in me. It irritates me because I think that it's such a great job. But what can you do? I know that the retention has been bad in Rockingham. What steps do you think that you can do to try to recruit, attract, and retain good prosecutors in Rockingham?
Sure, I think that's a very important question because it's a concern we've had statewide, but it's been a particular concern in Rockingham where there have essentially been open positions almost consistently for the last 3 years. I've worked a lot of different places that have all been, very different. I've worked at a car dealership. I've worked at a hospital. I've worked as a paralegal. And one thing has been consistent all of those places. The places that are successful keeping employees treat them well. And you can treat people well two ways. You can pay them, or you can be nice to them and create a positive work environment. Now, in an ideal world, you do both. Sometimes when you're in public service, that isn't necessarily an option. So when you're in public service, you fight with your commission, you fight with your delegation to make sure that you can get your people what they deserve. But if you can't, the other way to retain people is make sure it's a place that people really enjoy working. And that can be hard in prosecution because prosecution is hard. Sometimes you come in and the case that you have to work on that day is the case of a father who punches his 2-year-old child in the chest so hard he almost kills him. And that sucks, colloquially. Everything about that sucks. But you still have to find a way to do your job. And so the best way to help your attorneys do that is by having a positive environment where people want to go to work, where people feel comfortable at work, and where people feel like their opinions are valued and they are valued as employees. The other thing you can do about recruiting attorneys, so ever since I started up at the Carroll County Attorney's Office, I've made a point every year to go to the UNH Law job fair. And I personally meet everybody who is interested in summer internships, and I convince them to come all the way up to Carroll County, which is quite a drive away from Concord, because I want to make sure that they know it's going to be a really good environment where they're going to learn a lot. And then when you do things like that, sometimes they come and work with you later. John is on this call right now. He is somebody that we recruited as a second-year law student to come up and work with us over the summer, and we were thrilled that after he graduated, he decided he wanted to come up and work with us full-time. And I think if you are spending your time doing those things to recruit people, to let them know that this is a place that they want to work, you're going to see that you have a much more stable workforce. And that's good not just for office morale, but it's also good for the community. Because, you know, if you've been the victim of a really serious crime, and or your family member has been a victim of a real serious crime, you know, a rape, a murder, a serious assault, you want to know that the prosecutor that's working on your case knows what they're doing. And the best way to know that they know what they're doing is know that they've done it before. And if you're constantly churning prosecutors out of your office every 1 or 2 years because you don't pay enough and it's not a nice place to work, you're not going to have those experienced prosecutors who can handle those important cases, and you're going to let people down. So we need to make sure that the office is an inviting place, that it's a place where people who do good work are rewarded. And if we do that, then we're going to get the community support we need to make sure that people are paid what they deserve, because people are going to see those positive outcomes and see the value of having experienced, knowledgeable people working on their cases.
Steve, thank you for running. I'm really grateful that you stepped up. I have a question about the legalization of recreational marijuana. We're surrounded by states and Canada that have all legalized it in some way. And I guess Governor Sununu vetoed the legalization bill. They have decriminalized it. So a couple questions. One, what is your position on that? And two, is Pat Conway prosecuting any marijuana cases?
So it's a good question. So, you know, my position, my personal position on marijuana legalization, I was a member of the state legislature, and I have taken a public vote where I supported legalization of marijuana. I support it in a way that's structured, monitored, and regulated, which I think we have tried to do a few times in the past. But, you know, like you said, Larry, we've had some pushback from essentially every governor. As much as, you know, I loved working for Governor Hassan, she was no bigger supporter of legalization than Governor Sununu is. You know, I think as a prosecutor, I look at my job when I was talking about keeping the community safe. You know, what is the harm that you're preventing by prosecuting a certain case? And in Carroll County, we have taken the position generally that, you know, possession amounts of marijuana aren't something that the office is going to spend resources on. It's much more important in prosecution to spend resources on crimes that have victims and not things like possession of marijuana. You know, there hasn't been a lot of press about what Pat Conway is doing regarding the issue of marijuana. I've heard her speak on the issue before. You know, she is still very much in the 1980s DARE program, that marijuana is a gateway drug that is going to lead to harder drugs like heroin, meth, and fentanyl. And as somebody who spent time in the governor's office working on policies involving those issues, I really don't think that's the case. I think the problem is when you push behavior into the criminal sphere, it encourages you to continue in criminality. So when you have somebody who's meeting with a drug dealer to buy marijuana, eventually that drug dealer is going to convince them to buy something else. If they're buying it at the store next to the alcohol or tobacco that we sell off the highway in the state of New Hampshire or all along the Massachusetts border, then I think you're going to have a different outcome. So, you know, as a prosecutor, like I said, you know, I put resources where I think the community safety is most at risk. So regardless of what the governor decides to do in terms of legalization of marijuana, prosecuting marijuana cases would have just about the lowest priority possible in a county attorney's office that I lead.
Thank you. I know you talked before about how people need to take seriously who they put into office for the county attorney. And the citizenry has strong opinions on social issues, but they don't always know who their county attorney is unless they are arrested or are victims of a crime. What kind of public outreach do you envision for the office so that folks know where you stand on issues and what you'd like them to know about the office?
For sure. I think that's, when we're talking about kind of the broader issue of criminal justice reform, communication from law enforcement and between the law enforcement community and the community at large is so important. I think there have been some really positive steps on that, right? Both Exeter and Portsmouth police departments have announced over the last week or so that they're forming commissions to talk to the community about why they do the things that they do and get community input on, should they be changing use of force policies? Should they be changing different enforcement policies? And, if I was elected county attorney, number one, I'd be at those meetings because I think that you want to support those. As a county attorney, you want people to know that that those are the things that we want to see police departments doing. And, on the side of how to get people to understand what we're doing, I think you do that multiple ways. I think it's important to maintain a website where people can go and see what's current with the county attorney's office. I do think it's important for public offices to have social media. It's not so necessarily you can post things or like brands do online where they create like a brand identity, but that's the way that people communicate now. When you want to get help with Verizon, half the time you go have a Twitter exchange with Verizon. Or when you're trying to get some, parking thing figured out, you send them a message on Facebook. So you have to be present on these platforms for people to feel comfortable engaging. If all you have is a phone number routing you through a traditional call tree, you're not going to be engaging with anybody who's under the age of 30. So you have to be present on those platforms. You have to be available on those platforms so that people feel like you are a part of the community and that you're there to listen to them. And then the other, the thing that we can't do right now, but the thing that's so important is be out in the community. I think it's good to host meetings, host opportunities for people to come talk about criminal justice issues. And someday we will have a vaccine and it'll be safe to do those type of things again. And as soon as we do that, I would be going to as many groups like that as I could to make sure that people understand what we're doing and where we stand.